Welcome back. In the last few weeks, the world watched as an average American nicknamed Joe the Plumber grabbed the election's headlines as a barometer for anxious Americans. To test the water elsewhere in the world, we asked a Palestinian plumber, Omar, to tell us how America looks like from his end.
My name is Omar Abu Ghallous. I think the past American administration was totally biased towards Israel. They didn't give us anything. On the contrary, they gave Israel the green light to build checkpoints and construct the wall. That administration said they wanted to give Palestinians a state. Yeah, right. They gave us cantons. We live in a prison here, not a country. They put us in isolated prisons, then they said, here, you have an authority, but it's nothing more than a name. Bush's administration also fought the Arab and Muslim world in the name of fighting terrorism, but it was just trying to steal their wealth. Look at what they did in Iraq. They said they were going there to liberate Iraq. They didn't liberate Iraq. They destroyed it. And the situation in Afghanistan is only getting worse. If my voice could reach the new American president, I would tell him not to be too biased towards Israel. But I don't really have high hopes. They just changed the people in the administration, but the policies stay the same. But if my voice were to reach him, I would tell him that all I want is to live in a Palestinian state, where cities are not disconnected and where we have proper borders. I just want to be a regular citizen, like any citizen in the world, living in peace and freedom.
Tariq, the poor guy, the poor plumber, he just doesn't want America to be too biased towards Israel. But you know what? I looked at the names of those who advise Obama on the Middle East. Dennis Ross, Daniel Kreutzer, Daniel Shapiro, and now reputed to be probably his chief of staff is Rahm Emanuel, probably the staunchest Zionist in Congress. You have 4 Zionists. They are his advisors in the Middle East. How can we expect a fair American policy towards Israel-Palestine?
Well, we can't if those are the advisors. However, if he were to dump them now that he's president and ask Brzezinski to come into the White House and help him, we might actually get a different policy on Israel-Palestine. I mean, all they have to do now is to accept what many retired Israeli leaders are themselves saying to them, that we run an apartheid system in Israel, that the Palestinians deserve a state, and that Jerusalem should be divided. I mean, that is what Israeli leaders, unfortunately, who are no longer prime ministers, are now beginning to say publicly, including Olmert, who is not the most progressive of Israeli politicians. So I think this dependence, or the mutual interdependence of the United States on Israel, has to be broken.
Seamus, I'm not sure whether he will or not drop them, but there's one thing for sure. I've read an interview for him, for President Obama, in the Atlantic Monthly magazine with a journalist by the name of Jeffrey Goldberg. He actually associates himself with Zionism. He feels himself as a black American who, you know, was moved around and so on and so forth. He feels for Zionism, he said in the interview.
Yeah, I wonder how seriously we should take some of those things. I mean, you know, this is also a guy who in his past has had connections with quite prominent Palestinian figures in the US, and he's been taken to task for it by the McCain campaign, like with Rashid Khaldi. And he's a person who obviously understands something of the Palestinian suffering and the destruction of their freedom. And so, I mean, as to his personal views, I mean, you can read it in various different ways.
You think it's all politics? It's all just to get
there
the
are
power?
also other advisors like Rob Malley, who've been, you know, more sympathetic, who've supported
but he was ditched.
Talking with Hamas. Well, sort of ditched. So, I mean, obviously, given the system of power in the US, it's impossible, as we were talking about earlier, to run outside of certain very clear parameters. The question is really, I think, whether the entire state system in the US is prepared to make a move on this crisis and this problem, which is obviously a running sore not only for the world, for the Arab world, for the Muslim world, but for the United States itself. And it clearly has an interest in doing it. Its question is whether he can overcome the forces that are ranged against him. Now, interestingly, he's talking, I mean, they're talking now about making the first move on Syria rather than on the Palestinian question, because it looks to Obama and the people around him that it's an easier
It is an easier. It's basically like kicking it upstairs.
Well, it's also a way of trying to reassure the Israelis that Syria will manage and control Hezbollah rather than actually supply them with arms and let them get on with planning if indeed they still are another attack on Israel. So it's an indirect way.
You don't think that was over this front between Israel and Lebanon?
Well, I imagine this is the interest the Israelis have in this, is to try and neutralize Hezbollah. I mean, there's no other reason that they should be keen to talk to the Syrians to give up the Golan
But Stryker,
Heights.
the Arab-Israeli conflict, named the Palestinian one, as Tariq was saying, is basically resolved. Two-state solutions. Bush said that, Sharon said that, Olmert says that. Why shouldn't an Obama presidency impose a two-state solution in Israel-Palestine?
You know, it seems like we've been here so many times, and I just don't know. It will take a miracle, but maybe Tariq's right. Maybe the one thing you don't want to do is say, well, it's not going to happen. These are his advisors, therefore let's just move on. And yet at the same time, I just despair, really, that there will be a solution.
Let's fast forward the first 100 days. Do you think he might perhaps call for an international conference, as his predecessor wanted to do?
Well, there's all sorts of things they could be doing, because, you know, the pessimism is that Annapolis is failing. It will fail even if there's a statement at the end of it. Before Obama takes over, there's no Israeli government, as I said, until at least March, and even then it'll be one of these weak coalition situations. What they could do, however, is actually address the nature of Israeli security in a much longer term. In other words, I don't think we're going to see any shift in US support for Israel, the existence of Israel. Don't forget, the Israelis are talking much more now about the existential threat of Iran than they are about the Palestinians. But just to say that I think the US needs to reflect, and I don't know if they will, but there is certainly more promise now that they will, on how to defend the existence of Israel over the longer term and not encourage them into military ventures.
You think the existence of Israel is threatened?
The Israelis certainly think it is, and that has been the mindset that certainly the US establishment has brought into.
But are they really threatened? They're a nuclear power. They have one of the strongest armies in the world.
I'm not saying they are.
Which Arab country even comes remotely close to threatening?
I am talking about the mindset in the US. And if I can just finish to say that actually if they reset their defense of Israel's existence into boosting, if you like, a different approach to peace, because Israeli support
and they probably have to bring the Russians on board.
But they are paranoid about short-term security threats. What the US has to do is try and build up that confidence, talk to different Israelis, like these retired prime ministers. There's also other sections of Israeli society which are saying, if we carry on ventures like the attack on Hezbollah into Lebanon 2 years ago, we really will be sowing the seeds of our own destruction. We have to look at things in a different way and over a longer term.
And perhaps President Obama will. Gentlemen, Dr. Spencer, we're going to have to leave it there. Over the past hour, we debated the prospects of new American foreign policy. Whether President-elect Barack Obama has the capacity to reinvent America, there is little doubt he must improve America's standing around the world. Electing Barack Hussein Obama as first black American president presents an opportunity to end century-old tradition of muscular intervention around the world in the name of taking up the white man's burden of spreading Anglo-Saxon civilization of democracy and freedom. Since the English poet Rudyard Kipling first invoked the white man's burden to explain America's invasion and occupation of the Philippines a century ago, Washington's military interventions, occupation, and overthrow of sovereign governments continued uninterrupted. Barack Obama experienced these policies firsthand as a boy growing up in Jakarta. He's written that his views were first shaped by how people reacted to America's promotion of American-style capitalism and its tolerance and occasional encouragement of tyranny, corruption, and environmental degradation. That's why, unlike his predecessors, President Obama is well placed to understand the overwhelming alienation, not to say hostility, towards America in the South and particularly in the Arab and Muslim worlds, where Washington's policies have led to the death of 1 million people and the displacement of millions of others under the guise of exporting liberty and democracy. Paradoxically, it will be this black man's burden to put an end to the white man's savage wars of peace. Thank you for watching.